Okay, we're gonna discuss a fascinating talk by Dr. Bob Fosbury, who is a astrophysicist who also studies photon radiation as quantum biology, and he has discovered the secret of why forest bathing is so effective, why people feel so good in the forest, and he says it's due to frequency radiation pumping. So it's not kinetic energy, but rather it's resonance as radiation. And so I'm going to go over some of his key resonance discoveries. So this is the title of his talk that he gave at some London think tank, some highfalutin thing. Here was called Royal Society of something. Bath Royal Society. It's a charity. Anyway. So let's see. He starts out saying that near-infrared light penetrates deep into biological tissue because the cells have nanostructures, and so each cell will reflect the infrared photon about 100 times, and that enables that scattering to have the infrared light penetrate deep into living structures. So these are mushrooms in the forest, and so you can see the infrared light is penetrating deep into the mushroom structure, and the plants and trees actually emit much more infrared light than without them. So Dr. Robert Fosbury is emphasizing that infrared radiation starvation is 21st century scurvy because it's causing our mitochondria to not generate enough energy to drive our metabolism. So we end up getting metabolic diseases and also brain neurodegenerative diseases. Let's see. So he's an emeritus astronomer, an honorary professor in ophthalmology, University College London. So the peak frequency also has the highest intensity. So the number of photons is the highest at the resonant frequency for the mitochondrial electron transport chain. So in other words, the spectrum of light that is absorbed by our bodies that's coming from the sun is actually has the greatest intensity at the infrared frequency. And this same infrared frequency is the activation resonance frequency for the electron transport chain in the mitochondria. So this sunlight hitting Earth is is the peak of the spectrum of sun radiation. It's about 1 electron volt, which is exactly what is needed to initiate the electron transport chain in the mitochondria. So I started looking up based on his talk. I went into Google Scholar to just corroborate his claims. And it's well known that the mitochondria is relying on electron tunneling, but also proton tunneling through the quantum coherence. And so there's a lot of subtle details that they're still studying how this is working. And somehow the mitochondria is separating the electrons from the oxygen, and the protons are from the water. So we'll get into that later, but they're just calling it biochemical gymnastics to produce the ATP energy for the body. So what what's his name again? Fosbury. What Fosbury discovered is that the photon intensity is 10 to the 21, which is the number of photons per second per square meter per electron volt. That's hitting our bodies, but this 10 to the 21 is also the number of electron transport chains in our bodies. So there's a perfect match, a beautiful match of energy that's entering from the sun and the energy needed by our bodies. So as soon as we walk outside, we are getting this perfect match of energy to drive our mitochondria. And so here he is showing that the peak energy, the peak intensity of light is at the frequency of light that matches the mitochondrial resonance to trigger the electron transport chain. And so you have that 10 to the 21 electrons. Let's see what this is. Yeah. Couldn't quite read that, but. And so the number of electrons plus the frequency perfectly matches what our electron transport chains need to be fully activated by our bodies, so it's a perfect evolutionary match. So being alive is based on this quantum frequency of energy as radiation. So here again is showing the infrared light that's being scattered by the cells of the body going deep into the finger, which is pretty cool. So the visible light is limited by the pigments, but the near infrared light the scattering of the cells causes this deep penetration. So this happens in both plants and animals, but the plants need to get rid of that extra infrared light. And so he mentioned how this infrared light is being used to be shined into the skull, and since it activates the mitochondria, then it's treating all these neurodegenerative diseases like Parkinson's. And I thought that was quite a claim to make, but I actually found he was part of there's a study based on that research. So, okay. So he mentioned how you don't have to use electron tunneling to activate the electron transport chain in mitochondria, but on the other hand, if you increase the electrical field in the mitochondria, that will increase the electron tunneling probability. So I'm going to get into that more because I'm claiming that's the secret of meditation and alchemy, is you're relying on this quantum tunneling process instead of just relying on the photons directly. You're going straight to the quantum tunneling. And by doing that, you're conserving the energy required for metabolic and cellular functions. So he's saying that the mitochondria take energy from external food sources and energy from the sun. And together that drives the production of energy for the body. So the mitochondria are very similar to what happens from photosynthesis, but it's like the opposite process because photosynthesis is producing oxygen, and mitochondria, well, they also produce oxygen, but then the body itself produces CO2. So when you have the quantum tunneling, it actually reduces this oxidation, the free radicals, because you require less energy to achieve the electron transport chain. Okay, so here he's talking about the electron transport chain in the mitochondria. So he's saying you get the electrons from food, but obviously in meditation you'd be getting the electrons as a resonance with the Schumann resonance field of the earth, and also the microtubules that are resonate with ultrasound being piezoelectric in the collagen. So that's what I'm arguing is the secret to increasing the electrons internally, which then would increase the quantum tunneling. So you're not relying on sunlight in that case. Okay, so so he's saying when you are in the dark, you have to rely on this quantum tunneling. So that proves that when you do cave meditation, you're literally relying on quantum non-local coherence as your source of energy. That's the only way to explain it. So that proves that meditation is relying on quantum tunneling as the source of energy. All I'm saying is that the microtubules also rely on quantum tunneling from the quantum coherence through the ultrasound, and that's been verified in the research of Stuart Hameroff with Roger Penrose and Anirban Bandyopadhyay. And I'm just saying that energy then increases the electrons, which then powers the mitochondria through that electron directly. And what he proved is that when you're relying on the infrared light from the sun, the mitochondria barrier that causes this electron transport chain is 1 nanometer wavelength, which is also the de Broglie wavelength of the electron when it's converted from the 1 electron volt photon energy into electron energy. You're converting it from 1200 nanometers of the infrared, near infrared light to the 1 nanometer of the electron de Broglie wavelength. And that's why you get this quantum tunneling, because you get a quantum coherence of this conversion. So he's saying that the probability of this happening is low, but it increases when you increase the electron energy to 1 electron volt, because you get that resonance. And you don't need to rely on quantum tunneling when you go out into the sunlight, because you get so much more sun energy from the sunlight, from that from the frequency of the light being converted, the 1200 nanometers. So you have a time frequency resonance here, and then you have a direct wavelength quantum tunneling as the de Broglie resonance as the wavelength. So we know from the law of phase harmony of de Broglie that this quantum tunneling is actually due to a negative frequency, and he doesn't even go into that. I doubt he even, well, he probably knows about it. But so the point is that if you're able to resonate directly with that negative frequency through a photon energy, then you're able to create this quantum tunneling directly by increasing the energy of the electrons, the intensity of the electrons at that one electron. In other words, you increase the number of electrons that have that one electron volt. Okay, so that's basically what I'm describing here. Okay. So he's saying that the cells are structured with these nanostructures in the endoplasmic reticulum that then traps the infrared light, near infrared light, to be then absorbed by the mitochondria. So he's saying that when we are out in the forest in the shade of a tree, we feel really good, because the trees are emitting so much more of this near infrared light as a byproduct of the photosynthesis. And because we're in the open air with the blue sky above, there's a much greater radiation temperature difference between our bodies and the blue sky, which is minus 40 Celsius in the atmosphere. But since it's based on frequency radiation, then because there's a direct connection and an energy gradient in comparison to being inside a house. If we're inside a house, we don't have that temperature gradient between the open energy exchanges, radiation, with the blue sky. So that increases the energy flow, which then activates the mitochondria even more. And that also explains why being in a cold temperature would increase your mitochondria activation and generate more energy. And so he mentions that there was a study done in a culture where they never go outside because of the heat. and so they're always exposed to artificial light, that's the blue light spectrum. And he said that they have a very high rate of diabetes. And so then again, when I looked up his research, sure enough, I found a study on this particular problem. And they're saying that the blue light in the eyes actually relies on glycolysis, which is different than the usual metabolism of the mitochondria. So it's not mitochondrial respiration. So when you convert to glycolysis, then you're not creating energy in the same process, and then it causes diabetes when you're just getting blue light all the time. So that's really fascinating that the blue light would directly cause that problem. Because of course, like, everybody's staring into their cell phones or computers like I'm doing right now. I mean, that's normally I wear the blue light blocking glasses. Okay, so here's a fascinating study, because again I mentioned the connection between the mitochondria and the microtubules, and here they're talking directly about the collagen. And there's a study on the reindeer, and he was part of this research also, where they're claiming that the reindeer's changing the collagen rod spacing in the eyes by changing the volume of the fluid, and so that changes the pressure based on whether it's summer or winter, and then that changes what kind of frequency of light that they're absorbing. So it's all about like these nanostructures, and the frequency of light is radiation. So that just proves that there's a direct connection between the collagen that activates the microtubules and the mitochondria energy. That's what I wanted to point out, that my own claim about that would be corroborated with this study. And of course, when you change the volume of the interfibral fluid in the winter to shift towards blue light, then I mean, that's directly connected to like what yoga would be based on, with the piezoelectric change of the collagen from the storing the charge in the cerebral spinal fluid, and the lecithin that can insulate the neurons. So I think this is a fascinating study on why forest bathing is so effective for healing the body, why people like to be in the woods, because the trees are actually emitting infrared light at a much higher level, and why being outside is crucial to activating your microtubule to generate energy properly, because of that infrared light. And so I want to thank Dr. Bob Fosbury for his fascinating research.
Heat engine here. This is a Stirling engine, a heat engine, which is operating at a temperature difference which corresponds to you sitting in the room at the moment.
So he shows that when he adds cold to this Stirling energy, then it accelerates the pumping action. So this is that temperature gradient, but it's driven by the frequency change of the light. And that's what he's trying to say, is that it's a radiation based on frequency difference of the photons that's actually driving this heat pump in the body of the mitochondria.
The plate there is about 40 degrees, and the surroundings is sort of room temperature. Now here I put an ice pack to cool the top surface, and you'll just notice the rate at which that is spinning. There's supposed to be sound there. I couldn't make it loud enough, but you'll realise that it's getting faster. It's cooling that top plate down to about 0 degrees centigrade. You see it's really speeding up now. It gets about twice as fast. And that's what I mean by you getting much more usable energy if you have a cold environment. And this is why, when clothes were developed, you could go and live close to the Arctic. And you could keep your body warm, but your lungs would breathe in cold air. And so you have much more energy when you live in a cold environment. The navvies that built the canals, they couldn't have done that in the tropics because they couldn't have generated nearly as much energy.
So that's another explanation for the Wim Hof effect, is why your body's generating so much heat is from the actual temperature gradient of the cold. That then changes the quantum pressure. It's like you have a condensation, or of the pressure and density are interconnected based on the temperature. Let's see, so here's everything he's changing. It's basically like everything you can think of. So I'm just pointing out that he mentions the quantum tunneling, but if you can focus on the quantum tunneling as the true cause of the energy, then you can take this mitochondrial metabolism to a deeper level. But as it is, this is what we're adapted to. So here he's talking about this is the tunneling.
Often enough for us to survive in darkness. As soon as we walk out into sunlight, we don't have to bother about quantum tunneling anymore, because we can leap over the barrier without any difficulty. But it means that when you're in darkness, you can't generate huge amounts of energy from your mitochondria. And there's another extraordinary coincidence here, which is a little bit more subtle than the other one. But I was talking.
Okay. So what he doesn't get into is he's relying on probability, but when you get into the non-commutativity, it's not based on probability. So the quantum tunneling is inherent to the negative frequency and time reversed energy that would be like correlated to the de Broglie wavelength of 1 nanometer and the 1 electron volt energy. So if you're able to generate this electron volt energy directly through the microtubules as a piezoelectric energy, then that would power the mitochondria directly. And so the mitochondria then create the yang qi as the proton energy, because this is the electron in the mitochondria, but there's also a proton. This has a proton, and then this is the electron. So they're related, So anyway, I'm just gonna leave it at that. and thanks for your time.